The unthinkable interview, a live TV showdown. The buzz inside the Today Show studio was at its usual morning peak. Bright lights bathed the iconic New York set, making the famous plaza outside glow. Crew members, moving with the practiced urgency of live television, rushed about in their headsets, clutching coffee mugs that steamed lightly in the controlled indoor climate. At the center of it all was Roker, the show's veteran anchor. Known universally for his trademark charm, comforting warmth, and infectious smile, Al was flanked by his co-hosts, preparing for what was meant to be a simple, high-profile chat. It was a typical morning in every way, except for the guest waiting in the wings. This wasn't a celebrity promoting a film or a best-selling author. It was Prince Harry. Harry entered the studio in a sharp, tie-less navy suit. He carried the weary yet casual confidence of someone permanently accustomed to global scrutiny. The live audience offered polite applause as he approached the desk, shook Al's hand, and settled into the guest chair. For a brief moment, the energy was perfectly manageable. Millions of viewers at home tuned in expecting a lighthearted, perhaps slightly revealing, interview. A royal on American morning television, ready to chat about new charitable ventures, family life, and maybe a funny anecdote. "Good morning, Prince Harry." Al greeted him brightly, his professional warmth evident. "It's truly great to have you with us here in the studio. How are you feeling this morning?" Harry managed a quick smile, but it seemed to stop short of his eyes. "I feel fine," he replied, his voice calm, but with a distinct undertone. "It's not every day I do one of these shows, though I imagine you'll try your best to make it into a bit of a circus." A thin, awkward chuckle went through the audience, unsure whether to take the comment as a joke or a genuine jab. Al, ever the professional, brushed it off with a hearty laugh. "Well, we'll try to keep the circus animals outside," he quipped gently. "Let's start with something simple, then. You've been incredibly busy recently. New ventures, appearances, and, of course, your significant charitable work. Tell us what's driving you right now." Harry leaned back, crossing one leg over the other with deliberate ease. "What drives me is doing things on my own terms," he stated, his voice gaining a hard edge. "Not on the monarchy's terms, not on the tabloids' terms, and certainly not on the media's terms." The room stiffened noticeably. It wasn't overtly hostile, but the raw honesty of his tone carried a definite defiance. Al maintained his composed demeanor and nodded calmly. "Fair enough. Speaking of doing things on your terms, you and Meghan have taken some truly bold steps in redefining what royal life means, for you both at least. How has that transition been for your family?" Harry's smile completely vanished, replaced by a cold smirk. "I wouldn't call it redefining. I'd call it surviving. And frankly, the people who keep asking about transition simply don't understand what it means to escape a gilded cage." The audience shifted uncomfortably, the initial positive energy quickly slipping away. Al, with remarkable focus and his usual warmth, pressed on. "Escaping a gilded cage, that's a powerful image. But I'm sure our viewers are curious. What does day-to-day life look like now for you and Meghan? Parenting, work, family time?" Harry straightened in his seat, his voice immediately sharp. "Parenting is private. Unlike some people, I don't parade my kids for the cameras, so forgive me if I don't give you the sound bite you're fishing for." The air in the studio became heavy and thick. A ripple of nervous murmurs spread through the live audience. Al's co-host, sitting just off camera, shifted visibly, perhaps ready to step in. But Al simply smiled, his tone still kind. "Of course, Harry. No one's asking for a soundbite," Al reassured him. "Just giving you space to share what you'd like about family life, on your own terms." Harry's eyes narrowed slightly. Family life is family life. End of story. If people can't grasp that simple fact, maybe they should look at their own families instead of obsessing over mine. The sharpness of the words drew a soft, collective gasp from the audience. Al let out a small, almost strained chuckle, attempting to diffuse the growing tension. "Point taken. Let's pivot, then. Your charitable foundation has been in the spotlight, and you've spoken a lot about mental health awareness. That's an area where you've been a real voice for change." For the first time, Harry leaned forward, his tone firm, though still tinged with an obvious arrogance. "Yes, I've been a voice for change because, unlike most, I've actually lived it. And frankly, I'm tired of people questioning my sincerity, as if I'd make something like this up just for attention." The statement hung in the air. No one in the room had actually accused him of exaggerating, yet his deep-seated defensiveness filled the space with static. AL's co-host nervously adjusted their mug. Al nodded calmly. No one's questioning sincerity here, Harry. We all know these issues matter deeply to you, but it does raise a question about balance. How do you handle your need for privacy while also speaking so publicly about deeply personal struggles? Harry smirked again. Balance. That's rich coming from the media. Privacy doesn't exist when people like you keep demanding access. You can't ask about balance when you are part of the imbalance. This time, the audience murmured more audibly, a sound of definite disapproval mixing with agreement. Al, still trying hard to keep the conversation light, chuckled again. You're certainly keeping me on my toes this morning, he said, lifting his coffee mug. I'll have to drink more coffee to keep up. Harry did not offer a smile or a reciprocal laugh. Maybe drink less coffee and ask better questions. The crowd reacted with a collective, audible gasp. AL's co-host's smile froze completely. The energy had entirely shifted. A confrontation was now undeniable. Al, showing remarkable restraint and professionalism, smiled once more and leaned in slightly. Well, that's what live television is about, a conversation. And we've only just begun. But as the segment cut to a brief commercial break, the audience began whispering anxiously among themselves. Something was already unraveling. This wasn't going to be a simple, cheerful royal interview. It was rapidly becoming a public showdown. The commercial break ended, and the powerful studio lights flared back up. The audience, still buzzing from the sharp exchanges in the first segment, settled into an uneasy silence as the cameras began to roll. Al Roker flashed his signature smile, but even through the professional warmth, a flicker of genuine tension lingered in his eyes. Welcome back to the Today Show, he announced, turning toward the camera. We're continuing our compelling conversation with Prince Harry, talking about his work, his journey, and his thoughts on life beyond the palace. The audience applauded softly. Harry nodded stiffly, now leaning back in his chair with his arms tightly folded. He looked less like a comfortable guest and more like a reluctant defendant who had decided to fight the entire jury. Al pressed forward with practiced ease. Harry, I want to ask you about something the public has been absolutely fascinated by. You've spoken before about the difficulty of stepping away from the royal family to build your own life. What has been the greatest challenge in carving that independent path? Harry tilted his head, a dismissive smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. The greatest challenge? Dealing with questions like that. Everyone acts like leaving was some kind of heroic act or a catastrophic betrayal. It was neither. It was simply me deciding I was done being a mascot for an outdated institution. The crowd murmured. Al nodded slowly. I hear you, but a lot of people still see you as deeply tied to the monarchy, whether you like it or not. Do you feel any lasting sense of responsibility to that role? Harry chuckled dryly, shaking his head. Responsibility? I've spent my entire life being told what my responsibility is. To wave at crowds, to cut ribbons, to smile, while others lived real lives. I owe nothing to the crown. If anything, it owes me. The sharpness of his tone landed heavily on the room. Audience members exchanged uneasy, uncomfortable glances. Al, the consummate diplomat, leaned forward, adopting a lighter tone. So, would you say you've closed that chapter completely? No chance of returning to royal duties in any capacity. Harry snapped back without a second of hesitation. Not unless I hit my head and forget everything I've learned. Why would I ever go back to a family business that feeds me to the wolves and then pretends they're protecting me? No, Al, that chapter isn't just closed, it's burned. The live audience gasped audibly. AL's co-host shifted again, exchanging looks that clearly questioned the prince's explosive choice of words. Still, Al smiled, though his eyes were now visibly tighter. Strong words. Let's talk about your current family life, then. Your children, Archie and Lilibet, how are they adjusting to life here in the U.S.? Harry's expression darkened instantly. Why should I answer that? You people always want to pry into the private lives of children. My kids don't exist for your audience's entertainment. Al raised his palms gently. Of course, no one is asking for details that compromise privacy. But many parents watching at home admire how you balance public work with raising young children. It's a chance to share something meaningful. Harry scoffed dismissively. Balance? That's another media buzzword. Here's the truth. I don't need to explain how I raise my children to strangers drinking coffee in their pajamas. My family isn't your morning show filler. The crowd reacted with a low, uncomfortable murmur of disapproval. Al's smile flickered but remained fixed. He glanced briefly toward the cameras, then back at Harry. Fair enough. But you've also chosen to share certain parts of your family life in interviews and documentaries. So, some might say. Harry cut him off sharply. Some might say that's always how it starts. Some might say, critics argue, sources claim, it's lazy journalism wrapped in gossip. For the first time, a visible crack of genuine irritation crossed Al's face. He inhaled deeply and let out a small, measured laugh, trying to keep his tone soft. Well, I'll take the lazy journalism insult in stride, he said, his voice still gentle but firm. But I think what our audience is looking for is authenticity. When you choose to share some things, but adamantly refuse others, people naturally have questions. Harry leaned forward, his eyes flashing with a cold intensity. Authenticity doesn't mean I owe anyone every single detail of my life. It means I speak when I choose and about what I choose. You don't get to set the terms, Al. Neither does the press. Not anymore. The atmosphere had grown tense enough to cut with a knife. Al pivoted, his voice still calm and steady. Let's talk about your projects, then. Your production company has drawn significant attention, some praise, some criticism. There were reports that you and Meghan requested higher pay for your latest streaming series. Is that true? Harry let out a short, cynical laugh, dripping with contempt. The money question always comes up, doesn't it? No one ever asks how much the royal family costs the taxpayers. No, they just ask me how much Netflix pays. Maybe you should call up Buckingham Palace and request their receipts. The audience gasped audibly, some even laughing nervously at the audacity. Al chuckled lightly, though it was now abundantly clear his professional patience was severely thinning. Well, I think people ask because you've been very public about financial independence. So, naturally, deals like that raise interest. Harry's smirk hardened. Financial independence means I don't have to justify a single paycheck to you or anyone else. I walked away with nothing but my name. And if people can't handle that I'm turning it into something valuable, that's their problem, not mine. The room was rigid, filled with the sheer weight of his words. Al nodded, still visibly calm, but a distinct firmness was now creeping into his tone. Fair enough. But when you talk about transparency and accountability, surely financial arrangements are part of that conversation. Harry's voice sharpened like a blade. No, Al, transparency is about truth, not about pandering to a nosy public obsessed with how much I make. If they want transparency, maybe they should demand it from the people still wearing crowns and tiaras, not the one who walked away. The tension snapped like a live wire. The audience reacted with murmurs, gasps, and a few supportive claps. Al pressed his lips together, his famed patience clearly frayed beyond repair. The segment cut once more to a commercial break, but the audience knew that the storm was only building. Harry wasn't backing down, and Al, the ever-patient anchor, was finally reaching his breaking point. The next segment, everyone could feel, was going to explode. The music's sting faded, and the cameras found their marks once more. Al Roker's smile returned, practiced and polite, but now it looked ironed into place. On the sofa to his left, Hoda Kotb, one of his co-hosts, angled herself toward the guest, hands loosely laced, her soft eyes doing their best to lower the temperature in the room. Welcome back to Today, Al said, his voice rich and steady, but devoid of its former warmth. We're here with Prince Harry, continuing our conversation about life, work, and the choices that come with public attention. Harry sat forward, elbows on his knees, his posture daring the hosts to challenge him. I'm not here to perform, he interjected before Al could launch the next question. Let's not pretend this is anything but another chance for the media to dissect me. Hoda stepped in gently. No one's asking you to perform, Harry. We're listening, and I think a lot of people are actually rooting for you. They've watched you grow up. Harry's smile was thin and cold. They watched. That's the verb that got me here. Al absorbed the jab with a slow nod. Then let's talk about agency, he offered. You choose your projects now, documentaries, philanthropic initiatives. If you could name one thing you're proudest of this year, what is it? My refusal to be baited, Harry said crisply. A few audience members tittered nervously. Al absorbed the jab. Okay, he said, still friendly, but the sincerity was strained. Let me try a specific lane, and you can steer me off it if you want. You and Megan, creatively, how do you keep one another honest? I ask as a married guy. Sometimes my wife's note saves the whole broadcast. Harry's eyes flicked to him dismissively. We don't need cutesy metaphors to justify working together. We're adults. We communicate, and we don't owe anyone a peek behind the door. Hoda's laugh was light and non-threatening. Fair, she said. I think he was just asking about collaboration, not the color of your sofa. It's always the sofa next, Harry replied with a cool, world-weary shrug. Al held his gaze slowly, letting the moment pass. He turned a note card. There's a curiosity, fair or not, about your relationship with the institution you left. Some viewers still wonder if there's space for healing. Harry scoffed. The word healing draped over the sofa's back like a dare. Healing doesn't mean pretending the fire never happened, Al. It means walking away from the ashes. And yet, Al said, gently persistent, you speak about that fire often. Is there a path where you don't have to? Where your work stands entirely alone? Harry's jaw worked with barely suppressed anger. That's the plan, and the press is the obstacle. You collectively keep asking me where the smoke came from, then complain about the smell. A small flicker of annoyance crossed Al's face, a brief eclipse of his famed patience. Hoda immediately intervened, sliding in like a mediator. Let's give the audience something they can use, she said kindly. A lot of people struggle with boundaries. What's one boundary you've drawn that's made your life meaningfully better? Harry's gaze softened by a millimeter. I don't answer questions just because they're asked. Hoda nodded. That's a good one. Al offered a small, curt smile. And yet here you are? So, let me ask one you can absolutely pass on. Your children. Not names, not stories. Just, what's the value you hope they grow up holding from you? Harry weighed the air for a heartbeat, and it seemed he might let the drawbridge down. That they never mistake politeness for respect, he said. That's thoughtful, Al replied, genuinely. So, when people ask you about privacy while you're also... Harry cut in sharply. There it is. Always the pivot to the contradiction you've already decided exists. Al kept his voice low and even, the steel underneath becoming unmistakable. I'm asking how you square it, that's all. By refusing to square it for you, Harry said. Or for anyone who thinks they're owed the geometry of my life. The audience murmured restlessly. Hoda shifted again, palms open. Let's go wide angle, she suggested. You've described the monarchy as outdated. Some viewers hear that and feel attacked. Others applaud. What do you want people to understand when you say it? That duty without humanity is theater, Harry replied instantly. And I'm done acting. Al nodded slowly. Some might hear that as a direct swipe at your family. Some might hear what they're paid to hear, Harry said, his eyes cool and dismissive. A tiny beat of silence followed. Then Al's baritone returned, still courteous but now laced with offense. I'm not paid to hear anything. I'm paid to ask it. He glanced down at his cards. Reports again. Reports suggest you and Megan pushed for expanded budgets on upcoming projects. Scope, not gossip. Does bigger mean bolder? I don't pitch small, Harry said. Small is for people who are afraid to be seen. Or for people who want the work to be the star. Al offered, friendly, but the line carried an unmistakable edge. Harry's smile didn't waver. I don't need lessons on humility from a man tallying ratings between weather hits. A ripple of shock moved through the audience. Hoda's eyebrows rose. All right, let's breathe, she said softly, aiming her warmth at the crowd. Live TV is a ride. Al clasped his hands together. The smile remained, but his eyes were hard and still. Here's a question I think is fair, and you can absolutely say no. Is there anything you wish you'd handled differently? Just one thing since stepping back. Not for headlines, for yourself. Harry stared at him, holding his gaze. I wish I'd stopped believing that good faith existed in rooms with cameras. The audience went completely still. Hoda's gaze dipped, sympathy etched in her face. Al nodded once. I hear the hurt in that, he said, sincerity washing through the sentence. Truly. Harry softened barely. Then let's not pretend this is a neutral exchange. Al's smile faded to something taut and serious. I never said it was neutral. I said it was a conversation. Harry tilted his head in challenge. Conversations don't arrive with preloaded doubts. They arrive with curiosity. Al countered, a trace of heat in his voice. And sometimes with inconvenient follow-ups. Hoda touched AL's sleeve, a gentle anchor. We're almost out of time in this block, she said, eyes flicking between them. Maybe we can close with gratitude. One thing you're grateful for this week. Harry looked to the lights, then back at Al, that I can get up and walk when a room stops deserving my answers. A low ooh rolled through the audience. Al held the stare for a beat too long. All right, he said finally, his voice composed but clipped. We're going to take one more quick break. When we return, we'll talk legacy, responsibility, and what accountability looks like when the spotlight is something you say you don't want. Harry laughed, short, dismissive. Accountability. That word again. AL's jaw tightened, and Hoda's hand stayed on his sleeve a fraction longer than necessary. The music hit. The red light died. On set, no one moved. The aircon hummed like a warning. Hoda leaned toward Al, whispering, "Let me take the open. Cool it down." Al didn't answer right away. Then, quiet as a front rolling in, he said, "He keeps calling questions an attack. And you keep meeting him halfway. One more segment, then we're out," she replied firmly. Across from them, Harry rolled his shoulders, a boxer between rounds, his eyes bright with the adrenaline of refusal. The floor manager counted down with raised fingers. 3, 2, 1. The theme music faded, and the cameras panned back to the sofa. On the left, Al Roker sat upright, his smile now thinner than paper, having finally run its course. Hoda leaned forward, still working to project warmth into the room. Across from them, Harry adjusted his blazer, settling into the cushions like a man daring the set to collapse beneath him. "Welcome back," Hoda began, her voice carrying that trademark gentleness. "We've been having an energetic conversation this morning, and I want to thank our guest for his honesty so far." Harry gave a tight nod. "Honesty is expensive, Hoda. Most people can't afford it." A ripple of uneasy laughter passed through the studio audience. Al cleared his throat, abandoning his note cards. "So," he said carefully, "let's talk legacy. A lot of people see you as someone who stepped away from tradition to build something new. What do you want that to look like 5 years from now?" Harry's lips curled into a smirk. "Legacy is a word the press invented to sell headlines. I want to live. That's all. Living is enough." "That's fair," Hoda said softly. But AL's legendary patience had finally run out of rope. He leaned forward, his voice still calm, but heavy now, like storm clouds rolling in. "Let me be straight, Harry," Al said. "Every answer this morning, it has dripped with contempt. Contempt for the questions, for the press, for anyone who dares to ask you something you don't pre-approve. But you chose this stage. You walked into this room. Do you realize how this comes across?" Harry blinked, visibly caught off guard by the sudden steel in AL's tone. "It comes across," he said slowly, "as a man refusing to bow just because someone with a microphone demands it." Al shook his head, a single, definitive gesture. "No, it comes across as arrogance. You talk about privacy while cashing checks from documentaries that trade on the very life you say you're protecting. You attack the monarchy, but build your entire brand on the royalty you claim to despise. And here, right here, you dismiss this audience, this crew, this network as if we're beneath you. That isn't courage, Harry. That's hypocrisy." The audience gasped audibly. Hoda's hands shot out, fingers brushing AL's arm in a silent, desperate plea to cool down. But the dam had already burst. Harry's face flushed crimson with rage. "Hypocrisy? You sit here in your studio, fattened by corporate dollars, pretending you're the moral compass of America," he spat back. "I don't pretend." Al interrupted, his voice sharp now, fully breaking his anchor persona. "I show up day after day. I ask tough questions, and I don't bite the hand that gives me the platform." The silence that followed was suffocating. The crew froze. The studio audience leaned forward, hanging on every syllable. Harry stood up suddenly, the guest chair screeching against the floor. "I don't have to sit here and be insulted on live television," he snapped. "This entire charade proves why I left the system in the first place." Al rose too, meeting him eye to eye. Decades of broadcasting experience held him steady. "And this proves why so many people are done giving you sympathy. You want the perks without the accountability. You want the fame without the questions. And frankly, this show doesn't need it." Hoda stood now as well, trying desperately to mediate. "Gentlemen, please, let's all take a breath." But it was far too late. Harry grabbed his notes, his jaw clenched tight, and turned toward the exit. "I don't need this," he said, his voice loud enough to echo off the walls. And I certainly don't need you. The cameras caught every step as he stormed off the set. The door banged open, then shut behind him, leaving only stunned silence in his wake. Al faced the audience, breathing hard but already regaining his professional composure. Folks, he said, lowering his voice, an air of apology washing over his features. I want to apologize. You came here for a conversation, and it turned into something else entirely. That was not the intention. Sometimes live television takes turns none of us expect, and I'm sorry you had to witness that. The audience broke into uneasy applause, unsure whether they were supporting the apology or the confrontation itself. Hoda placed a hand gently on Al's shoulder and turned to the cameras. We'll be right back. The red light blinked off. The set exhaled. But across the country, millions of viewers were already texting, posting, and tweeting about the moment the prince stormed off the Today Show. It was the kind of live TV explosion that would be replayed for years, a clash between deep entitlement and public exasperation, between a prince who refused to bend and a host who finally broke. By the end of it all, only one of them was still standing in the light.